It was reported by the New York Times that apparently they have a source that says that the DOJ seems to be planning to release a memo stating that there will not be civil rights charges charged against Darren Wilson, Officer Darren Wilson. I mean, actually, but no, he's no longer a cop now. Ex-officer Darren Wilson in the shooting of Michael Brown. This is obviously has caused a bit of feelings, if you will. I think that's as clear as I possibly can say. That's a consternation, annoyance, frustration, because this was one of the things that people were promising and talking about when we first heard about the lack of an indictment on Darren Wilson. The idea was that there was still a investigation opened by the DOJ, so it wasn't going to just be nothing. We're still going to be able to possibly see some sort of action happen here. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, now we're seeing that apparently, according to the New York Times source, which I'm assuming they wouldn't go throwing this out there if it wasn't a pretty damn strong source, this is not going to occur. Imani?
Yeah, I have to say I'm not surprised by this at all. And I actually wrote an article for RH Reality Check a couple of months ago that talked about why it is that people sort of generally tend to look at the announcement that a DOJ investigation has been opened up. They look at these announcements and they're very excited because they think, well, we didn't get justice at the state level, but there's still the federal government. The federal government may swoop in and provide us justice. But the federal government it's very difficult for the federal government to provide specific justice in specific cases. So the problem is that a lot of people want justice for Mike Brown, and they're not going to get justice for Mike Brown. But what they might get is justice for future Mike Browns. So to the extent that this leaked memo is accurate, the DOJ is not going to file federal charges against Darren Wilson, but the investigation into discriminatory practices in Ferguson is still open. And it's that investigation that it's the so-called pattern and practice investigation that may lead to the sort of reforms that we saw in Los Angeles after the Rampart scandal, and in Pittsburgh, and in Cleveland right now. Cleveland is probably going to enter into a consent decree with the Department of Justice based on the Department of Justice finding that there was a pattern and practice of basically racial fuckery going on at the Cleveland Police Department. So I understand people's frustration, but just from a legal standpoint, there's really not much that the federal government can do. And I'll explain to you specifically why. So if the federal government was going to file charges against Darren Wilson, they would be filing charges under a particular section of the United States Code. It's Title 18, Section 242. It's called deprivation of rights under color of law. That statute, or a portion of that statute, says whoever under color of any law subjects any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, etc., to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution shall be fined or imprisoned, blah, blah, blah. So that means the willfully subjects is really where the rub is. What that means is that federal prosecutor would have to be able to prove that Darren Wilson intentionally shot Mike Brown with the intent to kill him or otherwise deprive him of his civil rights. Same with Eric Garner. The federal prosecutor would have to prove that the cop who killed Eric Garner did so intentionally. And it's really, really hard to prove intent, especially when you have inevitable testimony from the cop that says, I didn't do it on purpose, as the Eric Garner cop, I believe, testified. It was an accident. Or with Darren Wilson, I was defending myself, he was a threat, etc. It's very, very hard to prove intent unless you have some egregious piece of evidence like the Rodney King tape. So on the Rodney King tape, you see, police officers beating the crap out of Rodney King to such a degree that it would really be impossible to argue that it was an accident. And so that's why the federal prosecutor was able to get convictions on several of the cops that beat Rodney King. So I understand why people are frustrated. But the bright side of this is that hopefully it will lead to police reforms and that we can prevent future Black people and other people from being gunned down by the police like dogs in the street.
And that's the big thing here. I think, and it's the part that really doesn't make you feel better, because it is exactly what a lot of people have been saying before. How can you expect justice from a system that was not built for us? And so what you're seeing here is actually you're seeing a structural failure within the system overall. And so as we've been watching and paying close attention to Ferguson and what was happening down there, and the hopes and prayers. And please note, I still argue that it's not quite over there. Like the DOJ might not do it, but there's still a possibility if there was any type of like humanity in some of these folks that they could actually still appoint a special prosecutor, because McCullough showed himself to be what's the word? I mean, because we're a serious news show, Imani, so we can't. Incompetent is one word, or
bigot.
Say a bigot. You could say something like that. I was gonna say dickhole.
I think that's an accurate.
That was I mean, I'm gonna argue that like if you put someone on the stand knowing very well that they are in fact lying directly to you, and it's being used as a talking point throughout the framing and narrative game, which is the reason why you put out this information. I'm sorry I can't be like as reasonable as my colleagues here on TWiB Prime are. I think you're being a dickhole, and I hope you fall down. And the fact is that you should be, and honestly, you should lose your job. Like, this was a complete, like, farce of justice. Because in the end, all we wanted was to go to trial, to have the conversation. What exactly happened here? And that we never got. And we might never get it. And the fact is, the system that has been built around this to create this space, it's not built for us. And we're seeing that. And hopefully, yes, hopefully in the future, we will be able to see things change. Hopefully we'll be able to see things implemented that will actually be able to stop the next Michael Brown shooting, or at least be able to hold accountable the next Darren Wilson. But until the actual rules are changed, there's not a lot we can do, and that's why when everyone keeps talking about, when people come at us and they get mad at the protesters and they say, let justice happen, let the cops and the courts decide. It's like, really?
Right. Well, that's exactly what everyone was clamoring for, is an opportunity to let the courts decide. And we were denied that opportunity by a prosecutor who never planned to indict him in the first place, and by a governor who apparently is so, I don't know, feckless that he refused to tell McCullough to step aside and appoint a special prosecutor. There's a very small chance there's one circuit judge who could impanel a grand jury, but I mean, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So
yeah.
So the movement lives.